A major war has erupted in the Middle East. In what felt like the blink of an eye, targeted strikes have spiraled into a full-blown regional conflict. So how did we get here so fast? We're going to break down the timeline piece by piece to see how the chaos unfolded and why it's got the entire global economy on a knife's edge. Okay, just look at this timeline for a second. It's wild. It all kicks off on February 28th with something called Operation Epic Fury. Less than 3 weeks later, Iran's supreme leader is dead, other top officials are gone, and the country's energy heart has been ripped out. This wasn't a slow burn. This was a straight-up explosion. So what made this whole thing different from the start? Well, it wasn't just about hitting a few military targets or nuclear sites. No, right from the jump, the stated goal was way, way more ambitious. And that, right there, changed everything. And there it is. That's the quote from U.S. Central Command that lays it all bare. They weren't just trying to disrupt Iran this time. They were openly calling for the complete teardown of the regime. It was basically a signal to the Iranian people to rise up. That move completely changed the rules of the game. All right, to really understand how this all spiraled out of control, we need to zoom in on one single critical day, March 18th. Two things happened on this day that made it brutally clear this war was now being fought inside Iran's borders, not just from the air. First up, the economic jugular. The strike on the South Pars hub wasn't just a military operation. It was a direct hit on the regime's ability to even function. I mean, this is the place that quite literally keeps the lights on for the Iranian people and funds the government. And get this number, 94%. That's how much of its natural gas Iran uses on itself, for its own people. So you see the strategy here, right? This wasn't designed to hurt their exports. No, this was meant to cause maximum disruption to daily life and turn the population against their own leaders. And then, on that same day, the second punch landed. This was a classic decapitation strike. Esmail Khatib, this guy wasn't just another minister. He was the regime's iron fist, the man in charge of crushing protests and keeping the population in line. Taking him off the board was a direct shot at the regime's control over its own people. Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. This war isn't just being fought from 30,000 feet. This quote shows that it's being aided from the inside. You have Iranian civilians actively helping to target the very security forces that have oppressed them for years. That tells you just how deep the cracks in the society had become. And the result of all this? Absolute chaos. We're talking widespread paranoia within Iran's security apparatus. Morale has completely collapsed. There are reports of police stations just being abandoned, and security forces are so scared they're sleeping in their cars or in mosques to avoid being hit next. The regime's grip is crumbling from the inside out. Okay, so what happens when a regime feels weak and paranoid at home? It lashes out. And that's exactly what Iran did. This is the moment the conflict jumped the firewall and set the entire region ablaze. And Iran's retaliation was massive. They didn't just fire missiles at Israel. They went after the energy infrastructure of their neighbors. We're talking Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE. At the same time, their proxy, Hezbollah, opened up a whole new front from Lebanon. Just like that, this wasn't Iran's war anymore. It was a full-on regional war. And this brings us to the big picture, the global impact. You might be watching this thinking, okay, that sounds bad, but why does a conflict thousands of miles away really matter to me? Well, the answer hits a lot closer to home than you might think. Yep, how does this affect your wallet? Because, as it so often does in geopolitics, the answer comes down to one thing, the price of oil. A war in the Persian Gulf never stays in the Persian Gulf. Its shockwaves are felt everywhere. I mean, we've seen this movie before, right? History gives us a pretty clear roadmap. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, oil prices shot up almost 60%. When Russia invaded Ukraine, a 22% jump. And these price hikes don't just stay at the gas pump. They hit the stock market and fuel inflation across the board. And here's the core of the economic risk. It's not really about Iran's own oil production. That's only about 4% of the world's supply. The real danger is that the entire Gulf region is now caught in the crossfire. And that region altogether accounts for nearly a third of the world's oil. Threatening that supply creates a level of uncertainty we haven't seen in years. So with everything this volatile, we get to the million-dollar question. How does this all end? Well, experts have basically mapped out 4 potential endgames, and they range from, let's just say, optimistic to completely catastrophic. Okay, so here are the four paths. 1. A swift regime change. 2. Somehow everyone gets back to the negotiating table for a diplomatic solution. 3. Iran goes for what's called maximum retaliation and tries to choke off the world's oil supply. Or 4. This all escalates into a prolonged, brutal regional war. Let's quickly walk through them. Let's start with the two, let's call them best case scenarios, relatively speaking. A successful regime change could lead to a more stable Iran and eventually lower oil prices. But the risk of it turning into a chaotic, failed state is massive. Diplomacy, on the other hand, is the dream scenario for the markets. It would calm everything down and bring prices back to normal. Now for the much scarier options. If Iran decides its best move is to try and blockade the Strait of Hormuz, we would see an immediate, catastrophic spike in oil prices. But the absolute nightmare scenario is a long, drawn-out regional war. That would mean sustained damage to the global economy and would almost certainly trigger a worldwide recession. And so, that's where we stand. A fractured regime, a region on fire, and the entire global economy holding its breath. Which one of these paths is the most likely? What happens next? That is the terrifying question that, right now, nobody in the world has an answer to.